Good evening. Day 2 of Put Yourself in a Better Place. I was so reticent about doing this, but I decided that I would forge forward even in all this gruff, you know. There are no barbershops open in New York, and I could possibly try to do it myself. And so maybe this will push me to do some things that I normally don't do. But today, I am using the idea of Sankofa, of looking back to move forward. And Sankofa is a powerful symbol in history that we use to reflect on our past to move forward. So there are some people that I would like to just really pay tribute to. And as always, my mother Dorothy, my father Robert, my grandmothers who have both transitioned, Versi and Maddie, my grandfathers who have both transitioned, Sammy and Jethro, and to other people in my family like Harold Edwards, my uncles, my uncle Sammy Edwards, to some of my dear friends that reached out to me today, Mark Harrell, Selenia Hazelton, Afrida Gee, Dorothy Friedman August, Matthew Hupert and his wife Megan and their sons Miles, and to my other friends, Rosemary Howard over in Los Angeles, I heard from her. H.E. Fisher, I heard from her today, and to all of the people that I'm connected to, and to my family, my sisters and brothers, Dr. Carl Gibbons, my brother, my sister Natasha Williams down in Texas, and to my sister Latangela Freeman in Antioch, Tennessee. I appreciate you and I love you today, and I want to say all is well here in New York City. I would like to use that Sankofa moment to really reflect on some powerhouses I pulled off the shelf today. This is day 2 of Put Yourself in a Better Place. And so I pulled a book by a poet I met here in New York. Her name is Elaine Equi. And Elaine Equi wrote a book called Click and Clone, Poems by Elaine Equi. So if you have a chance to check her out or know who she is, please check Equi out. I'm going to read from a poem from her book that I pulled earlier. Elaine Equi. Side effects may include, that's the title of this poem, side effects may include. Warning, these poems may cause headaches, hives, hard-ons in women, vomiting vagueness, feelings of camaraderie where none exists, false hopes, poor judgment, loquaciousness, perspicacity, inexplicable tenderness, sighing, whining, ragged breath, narcolepsy, excessive nostalgia, smugness, auditory hallucinations, unmanageable hair, and some rare cases, lycanthropy, has been reported. Do not read these poems if you're pregnant or nursing without consulting a doctor first. Elaine Equi, Click and Clone. Check her out. Another powerhouse today is a wonderful, powerful writer that I've met here in New York. I think she's a professor at the College of Staten Island. I have met her as they paid tribute to her at the Poets House here at Battery Park here in New York. And I had the wonderful opportunity to meet Patricia Smith, and I want to read from her book, Incendiary Art. And thank you, Frida Grace Jones, for buying this book for me. And I want to read from that book today. Incendiary Art by Patricia Smith. She is such a powerhouse, and she's really taking me through in this time. She wrote a poem called Runaway. First, somebody gotta run. There's no sport in it otherwise. Everybody needs to be drunk on sun first, then just straight drunk. And there would be rot-toothed, cackling, dog-tired horses spewing snot, straps slashing, gashes in dead air. But somebody has to run, like he want to be in a place he can't see, like Jesus blew a whistle. The hunt needs a man who finally believes the murmured come-ons of that blaring star, who lingers a second too long in the red twist of a preacher's promise, and thinks that being free just may be that muted flesh at the end of his pointed finger. Over there, out there, over yonder north, always north, he chants, his whole body primed, egged on by a fleeting, luminous orchestra. But first, he's got to run. Everything he utters drips with a muddled, sugary faith. His first halting step clicks into rhythm, and night lunges forward to scar him. Sometimes he is a minute gone, maybe hours, sometimes a day before he realizes that all land is throat, that it swallows and swallows, then dribbles a dust that lies and calls itself light. The fear that he's on a journey that has already ended sparks. The smell, the salt that just barely blues his skin, and the dog doesn't know why or what it hates. It just knows that Negro blur and the damn repeated spin of it. The hound's strained heart is everything. An old gray muscle gasping backbeat for flailing rage, fevering against his leash. It snorts the deep, sweaty bowl of the runner's hat, one thin gray rock, an old work shirt. The car quivers with what it was born to do. There's just no sport in it otherwise. Straining forward on their steeds, the hunters whoop, addicts for the chase, while that wily northern star spits its sickly light along the length of the quest, nudging the huntsman and their quarry to very different versions of free. Check her out. The Grand Dame herself, the Grand Dame herself, Patricia Smith, Incendiary Art. I thought about how this would roll out and what are some things that I could include in all of this and how this can be relevant to these times that we live in. Here is a book by Goya, Francisco Goya, The Disasters of War. A few things by Goya. Pictures here. Fleeing, exile, torment. Fleeing, exile, torment. How can we capture the moments? How can we create words that will encapsulate and will chronicle this time that we live in? And oh, how we see, how we live in this moment, how we try to honor the arts of the time. Because as Shelley told us, we are the unacknowledged legislators of the universe, the poets and writers and artists and painters, and we must include them in the history of this time. That this time will be chronicled in a way that the generations after us will come to study what happened during this time. It's very, very important that you know that although this is devastation to many, and I don't try to diminish that idea, but this is also legendary and historic times. And many of the people that I know and I run into and have a chance to witness, they are extraordinary people. And I thank you for blessing me to know who you are. Another just important piece of material that I would like to share with you is all from the Equal Justice Initiative. And I went to their little conference they had here in New York a few years ago, and they give great books. And I'd just like to share a little bit out of the history of lynching in this country, because lynching is a historical term, but also lynching is still happening in a way, in this country. If you look at people of color, brown people, black people, people around the nation that will be not able to withhold and withstand this type of epidemic that's happening. So, and the incarcerated peoples, our incarcerated brothers and sisters, are really going to be hit hard. Okay? So I just want to, the Equal Justice Initiative, I think they're out of Montgomery, Alabama. They also host big conferences here in New York City, and they do great work. Lynching in America. Thousands of black people were the victims of lynching and racial violence in the United States between 1870 and 1950. The lynching of African Americans during this era was a form of racial terrorism intended to intimidate black people and enforce racial hierarchy and segregation. Lynching was most prevalent in the South after the Civil War, and there was violent resistance to equal rights for African Americans, and an ideology of white supremacy led to violent abuse of racial minorities and decades of political, social, and economic exploitation. Lynching became the most public and notorious form of terror and subordination. White mobs were usually permitted to engage in racial terror and brutal violence with impunity. Many black people were pulled out of jails or given over to mobs by law enforcement officials who were legally required to protect them. Terror lynchings often included burning and mutilation, and sometimes in front of crowds numbering in the thousands. Many of the names of lynching victims were not recorded and will never be known, but over 300 documented lynchings took place in Alabama alone. Jefferson County had the highest number in Alabama and the 9th highest total lynchings in the nation during the era of terror lynching. Thank you so much for what you do, Equal Justice Initiative. And that's also www.egi.org out of Montgomery, Alabama. So today we have heard from the wonderful New York poet Elaine Equi, Grand Dame herself, Incendiary Art by Patricia Smith. We also looked at some of the photos of Francisco Goya, the painter, The Disasters of War. And we also saw a few of the images and used our imagination to imagine lynching in this country by the Equal Justice Initiative out of Montgomery, Alabama. I'm almost finished. Thank you so much. Last year at City College, Rita Dove received the Langston Hughes Medal. And I had the wonderful opportunity to hear her and hear her read. And so tonight I would like to read a poem from Poet Laureate of the United States, Rita Dove. The title of her poem is In the Old Neighborhood, and it has an epigraph by Elaine Rich. Adrian Rich, I'm sorry, in the old neighborhood, to pull yourself up by your own roots, to eat the last meal in your own neighborhood. Adrian Rich. Raccoons have invaded the crawl space of my sister's bridal apartment. The landlord insists they're squirrels. Squirrels he'll fight, not raccoons. Too ferocious, licking their black-gloved paws. My mother works up a sud bath of worries. And what if the corsages are too small? If the candles accidentally ignite the reverend's sleeve? Father prefer a more reticent glory. He consoles his roses, dusts them with fungicide, spades in fortified earth. Each summer he brandishes color over the neighborhood, year after year producing lovelier mutants. Those bruised petticoats, for instance, are the sudden teacups blazing empty in its rim, a drunken red smear. And I am indoors, pretending to read today's newspaper. So I have been taught 20 years before, headlines first, lead story followed by editorials, local coverage. Even then I never finish, snared between date mines like Santiago and Paris and Dakar, names as unreal as the future even now. My brother rummages upstairs and I skip to the daily horoscope. I've read every book in this house. I know which shelf to go to taste crumbling saltines. Don't eat with your nose in a book, and the gritty slick of sardines, salted bones of no consequence, disintegrating on the tongue. That was Romeo and Juliet, strangely enough. And just as odd, stuffed green olives from a premature attempt at the Iliad. Candy buttons went with Brenda Starr, bazooka bubblegum with the Justice League of America, and Fig Newtons and King Lear, bitter lemons as well as for Othello, that desolate, conspicuous soul. But Macbeth demanded dry bread crumbs brushed from a lap as I staggered off the cushion contrite, having read for past my mother's calling. The rummaging stopped. Well, he found it, whatever it was. Bee vomit, he said once. That's all honey is. So I could not put my tongue to its jellied flame without tasting regurgitated blossoms. In revenge, I would explicate the strawberries. How each select seed choose to breed in darkness, the stomach's cauldron brewing a host of vines, trained to climb and snap a windpipe shut. Then watch my brother's eyes as mom sliced the red heart into sugar and left them to build their own improbable juice. I fold the crosswords away, walk back to the kitchen where the stacked platters high with chicken and silvery cabbage. Lean at the sink, listen to her chatter while the pressure cooker ticks. Whole again now. Where the maple tree used to stand, there once was a tent. Inside, a young girl weeping and her brother twitching with bravado because their father, troop leader in the pitch dark, insisted they love it by morning. Let me go back to the white rock on the black lawn, the number stenciled in negative light. Let me return to the shadow of a house moored in moonlight, gables pitched bright above the extinguished grass, and stalk the hushed perimeter, roses closed around their scent, azaleas dissembling behind the garage, and the bug-out pansies leaning over, inquisitive in their picketed beds. What are these, I'll ask, stooping to lift the pale leaves, and these weeds my father smatters from his pillow, all weeds, sound made by startling the first hot morning in June when Dad switched on the attic fan and nothing stared far away then, a chink, chip, shiver whittled beneath of a bird caught in the blade. We each dropped our books and ran to identify the first tragedy of the season. Baby sister run down or pebbly road. The lawnmower had shuffled into liver canapes. Each of us thinking at least I'm not the one. Who could guess it would be a bird with no song, no plumage worth stopping for? Who could think up a solution this anonymous? A switch flipped on reversed to blow the feathers out. Tea roses, I'd say, plus a few carnations and baby's breath, of course. Are ferns now too much? I'm back again. Matron of honor, firstborn daughter, nodding yet. As I wrap bones and eggshells into old newspapers for burning, folding the corners in properly as I had been taught to do. Selected poems by Poet Laureate herself, who won the Langston Hughes Medal last year at City College, my alma mater, Rita Dove. And so thank you for day 2 of Put Yourself into a Better Place. I read from the Pulitzer Prize winning Poet Laureate, Rita Dove. I've also introduced you to the Equal Justice League, who does a lot of work in the country for incarcerated people of color, incarcerated people, period. I've also introduced you to Disasters of War by Francisco Goya. Grand Dame herself, Patricia Smith, professor here at the College of Staten Island, and the poet Elaine Equi. I will finally end with one poem, and this is a tribute to my sister Tan Freeman down in Antioch, Tennessee. This is called Antioch, Tennessee. You may call it prayer because my mother is here, but the roads are slick, lonely with the barcode rolled down this neighborhood. There are no birds, just earthworms, sizzle on fresh concrete in the bottom of a skillet as I search for verse in this overworked ground, full of dull yellow and black bottom brown. People mind their business, and I guess I should leave the rest to history. And the news of the day is it's snowing in Memphis, so there is no reason to be restless. So I'm still blessed with this family and the monogamy of blood, and they have come here for the first time for a holiday, for a solitary function to be together.